December 6th, 325 AD. In the city of Nicaea, 300 bishops gather for the most important council in Christian history. A heated argument erupts over the nature of Christ. Then, in front of the emperor, one man rises and strikes a fellow cleric across the face. This man is Nicholas of Myra, the real St. Nicholas, the saint behind Santa Claus. But the story you know is a lie. He wasn't just a gift giver. He was a fighter, a miracle worker, a man who rescued children from death, walked with demons, and confronted evil like no one else. Tonight, we uncover the dark truth hidden behind the red suit. A theological dispute threatens to rip the fledgling Christian church apart. Arius, a presbyter from Alexandria, steps forward to deliver his argument. His words are precise, technical, almost surgical in their philosophical approach. He claims that Jesus Christ, though divine, was a created being, not co-eternal with God the Father. To the modern ear, such arguments may seem abstract or irrelevant, but in this room, in this moment, it is a matter of spiritual survival. If Arius is correct, then generations of Christians have been venerating a creature rather than the Creator. The very foundation of worship, the legitimacy of prayer, and the meaning of salvation all hang by a thread. The debate grows heated. Arguments clash, voices rise, and the room fills with tension. Then, from the back, a figure stands. Nicholas, Bishop of Myra, steps forward. He is not a young man. His hair is streaked with grey, his face lined with the deep marks of suffering and endurance. Nicholas has lived through persecution and imprisonment, seen his fellow Christians tortured and slain for their beliefs. In front of the emperor and the assembled church leaders, he strikes Arius across the face. Chaos erupts. Violence at a church council, especially violence directed at a fellow cleric, is almost unimaginable. Nicholas is seized, stripped of his bishop's vestments, and thrown into a cell to await judgment, disgraced, alone, perhaps even facing the end of his ecclesiastical career. Yet that night, legend tells us, a vision appears. In the darkness of his cell, Nicholas sees Christ and the Virgin Mary. They ask him why he suffers. His answer is simple yet profound: for loving you. By dawn, the vision leaves tangible evidence. His vestments are restored, the gospel returned to his hands, and his chains are inexplicably loosened. The council, awed and shaken, reinstates him. This man who would one day become the figure behind Santa Claus is far more complex than the joy, red-suited icon we recognize today. He was a fighter, a survivor, a man forged in the fires of persecution whose faith demanded action, not passive devotion. The image of a cheerful gift-giver masks a far darker and more morally complex reality. Nicholas was born around 70 AD in Patara, a prosperous city in the Roman province of Lycia, on the southern coast of modern-day Turkey. Patara was a crossroads of trade, connecting the east and west, a cosmopolitan hub of Greek culture, commerce, and maritime activity. Wealth and sophistication were abundant, yet danger lurked for those who followed the nascent Christian faith. For over 2 centuries, Christians had faced persecution, alternating between periods of tolerance and waves of brutal repression. Nicholas's childhood coincided with one of the most severe campaigns, the Great Persecution under Emperor Diocletian. Beginning into 84 AD, churches were destroyed, sacred texts burned, and Christians faced horrifying choices: renounce their faith or die. Executions were public and cruel, designed to instill fear. Others were sent to mines or forced labor camps, slowly worked to death. Women were enslaved or sold, and families were torn apart. It was a world where simple acts of worship could invite death. Orphaned at a young age when a plague swept through the region, Nicholas inherited considerable wealth from his devout Christian parents. Yet rather than seeking comfort or indulgence, he devoted himself to helping the vulnerable. His generosity was legendary. One of the most famous stories tells of 3 sisters whose father, impoverished and desperate, prepared to sell them into sexual slavery to provide dowries. Nicholas, under the cover of night, secretly threw bags of gold through an open window, enough to provide dowries for each girl. The father, realizing the identity of his benefactor, swore to secrecy. This story, retold through centuries, is the origin of the gift-giving tradition associated with Saint Nicholas. In some versions, the bags of gold landed in stockings hung to dry, inspiring the custom of Christmas stockings. But this story is far from sentimental. It was fierce, urgent, and morally uncompromising. Nicholas did not reward good behavior in a trivial sense. He intervened directly in human suffering, protecting the innocent from exploitation and ensuring survival. As Bishop of Myra, Nicholas's reputation for holiness and miraculous intervention spread rapidly. Sailors in peril prayed to him during storms, and the seas would calm. Prisoners cried out to him, and he was reported to appear in distant cities, saving lives across impossible distances. Illness and death were no match for his perceived divine authority. Nicholas's power was tangible, immediate, and morally weighty. He did not merely preach, he acted. Yet the most haunting story associated with Nicholas is the legend of the 3 children and the butcher's barrel. 3 young boys traveling through the countryside stop at an inn for shelter. The innkeeper, a butcher, murders them in the night and preserves their bodies in a barrel, intending to sell the meat to unsuspecting travelers for 7 years. This gruesome practice continues, the barrel topped with fresh bodies as needed. When Nicholas arrives, he immediately senses the horror descending to the cellar. He prays and performs what is described as the ultimate miracle. The children are restored to life, whole and unharmed, emerging as if from a deep sleep. The innkeeper is confronted, and justice divine or human falls upon him. This story, gruesome to modern ears, was central to medieval European Christian culture. It reflected stark realities: high child mortality, plague, famine, and violence. Yet the tale offered hope. Divine power could overcome even the most absolute evil. The resurrection of the children symbolized the triumph of life, goodness, and divine justice over death and human malevolence. Nicholas did not travel alone. Across Europe, he was accompanied by dark companions, figures whose sole purpose was to punish the wicked. These companions were terrifying, corporeal embodiments of moral consequence. Krampus, from the Alpine regions, is a half-goat, half-demon figure, chains rattling and birch rods in hand, menacing misbehaving children while Nicholas rewards the good. Other regions developed their own companions, Perfueted in France, a whip-wielding disciplinarian, Black Peter in the Netherlands and Belgium, carrying a sack for bad children, Repich in Germany, Schmutz in Switzerland, and paired devil and angel figures in the Czech lands. These figures were deliberately fearsome, making morality concrete for children and adults alike. The duality of the saint and the demon, reward and punishment, was central to medieval understanding of ethics. Children were not seen as inherently innocent, but as creatures needing guidance and discipline. The companions of Nicholas made morality tangible, immediate, and unavoidable. Nicholas's story is also inseparable from the pagan traditions of pre-Christian Europe. Winter solstice celebrations, long predating Christ, marked the darkest nights of the year, when the boundary between the living and the dead grew thin. Spirits roamed the earth, and the wild hunt thundered across the skies. The Church, rather than erasing these traditions, absorbed and Christianized them, transforming spirits into demons or agents of moral reckoning. Krampus, for example, retains traces of pre-Christian horned gods, but is subordinated to the saint's authority. After his death around 343 AD, Nicholas's influence did not wane. His tomb in Myra became a site of pilgrimage. Miracles continued to be attributed to him, reinforcing his legendary status. In 1087, Italian merchants transported his bones to Bari, spreading his cult across Western Europe. Churches from Ireland to Greece were dedicated to him, and December 6th became a day of celebration for children and charity. In the Netherlands, Santa Claus emerged as a stern, generous figure, traveling by steamboat from Spain, accompanied by helpers who punished misbehavior. Dutch settlers brought this tradition to New Amsterdam, later New York, where it evolved further. In the United States, the transformation was deliberate. Washington Irving's 1809 satirical work depicted Nicholas flying over rooftops, bringing gifts. In 1823, Clement Clarke Moore's poem, A Visit from St. Nicholas, reinvented him as the jolly, chimney-sliding G figure familiar today. Gone were the bishop's vestments, moral authority, and punishing companions. More's Santa was indulgent, entirely reward-oriented, and moral consequences disappeared. Throughout the 19th century, illustrations by Thomas Nast standardized Santa's image: red suit, black belt, round belly, white beard. In the 20th century, Coca-Cola advertisements solidified this image worldwide. The saint who confronted heresy, saved children, and commanded moral authority became a symbol of commercial pleasure. Yet traces of older traditions persist. In Austria and Bavaria, Krampusnacht continues each December 5th. In the Netherlands, Santa Claus arrives by steamboat, accompanied by helpers who maintain echoes of moral authority. Orthodox and Catholic communities honor Nicholas with prayer, icons, and liturgy. His bones, preserved in Bari, remain tangible evidence of a man who lived with courage and moral clarity. Nicholas of Myra represents a world where light and darkness coexist, where morality carries weight, and where action is necessary. Santa Claus comforts, indulges, and rewards. Nicholas demanded courage, vigilance, and ethical engagement. Every ritual, every tradition tracing back to Nicholas carries a fragment of this reality. Hanging stockings, offering gifts, celebrating generosity, all are echoes of a moral universe in which deeds mattered. In honoring these traditions, consciously or not, we participate in a story that has endured 17 centuries. The bones of Nicholas, scattered across Europe, remind us of his continuing presence. The saint who struck Arius, saved the 3 daughters, and resurrected children from a butcher's barrel remains a figure of moral seriousness and courage. We have replaced him with indulgence and fantasy, yet his legacy reminds us that darkness exists and that it can be confronted. Courage, justice, mercy, action, and consequence are inseparable. Nicholas's story, carried through centuries, challenges us to act, to judge, and to care in a world still full of darkness. Every December, rituals unfold. Something ancient persists. The shadow of Nicholas of Myra walks alongside us, the saint who confronted evil, rescued the innocent, and demanded moral vigilance lives on not in plush toys or advertising, but in stories, traditions, and the moral imagination. The longest night comes every year, darkness remains, yet hope and light endure. This is the real Saint Nicholas, not Santa Claus, not a commercial icon, but a man of faith, courage, and moral seriousness, a saint who walked among demons, confronted injustice, and brought light to dark places. Remember him, for his story is older, darker, and far more consequential than the myths we tell today.